Hello and welcome to another edition of the TES Secondary Maths Resource of the Week with me, Craig Barton. Now, if you ever are fortunate enough to bump into Mark McCourt, the man behind the National Maths Conferences, the man behind eMaths and LaSalle Education, and you ever want to wind him up, just say to him something along the lines of, tomorrow I'm teaching a mastery lesson. Because he flipping hates that. Because Mark says, and rightly so, that mastery isn't something you dip into. Oh, I'm doing mastery on Tuesday, I'm doing mastery next week. Mastery is a whole school approach to the learning of mathematics. And it's one of those phrases that gets bandied around. So whenever, in fact, I featured this resource as a resource of the day, and I share my resource of the days on Twitter, on TES Maths and on my Mr. Barton Maths Twitter, Mark was straight onto this. You can't have a mastery lesson, it's a load of nonsense, blah, blah, blah. So I couldn't help, not just to wind Mark up, but it is part of it, feature this as resource of the week because it's a flipping brilliant lesson, and I want to speak about how even if you are not teaching mastery, fully embracing mastery, how there are principles within this lesson that I just think are superb that can work for any approach to maths teaching. So let's have a look at it. It has been created by Tree1568, and there's actually a fair few files involved here. There's worksheets, PowerPoints and PDFs and so on. But the easiest thing to do is start with the PowerPoint, because there are quite a few things I absolutely love about this lesson that I just want to talk about in this video. So it's all about discovering the rule and practicing the rule for angles on a straight line equaling 180. But the first thing I love is how this rule's introduced, because the mistake I've made in the past, at least I think it's a mistake, is I've got kids measuring angles themselves with the protractor trying to discover the rule. But of course the problem is there, if kids aren't secure how to measure angles with a protractor, they can end up discovering completely different rules. I had one child who discovered that angles on a straight line add up to 200 degrees, which was more than a little worrying. So how do you get them to kind of buy into the rule and take a bit of ownership of it themselves and see it for themselves without having that risk that if they're not confident in another particular skill in maths, it can undermine the development of their understanding? Well, it's so simple. They have these angles already measured accurately and cut out. And then what students do is see which of these angles fit together. And it'll be no surprise that the 14 degrees fits with 166, the 65 fits with 115 and so on. So students actually find out for themselves without having to rely on dodgy measurements that angles on a straight line add up to 180. So I really enjoyed that bit of the lesson. But the fun's just getting going here, and there's again nice simple worked examples and so on. But I love this bit. Now, regular listeners will know I'm a big fan of diagnostic questions for obvious reasons. This is a great question because look at this, that 60 degrees is there. Now, how often in the past have I introduced examples that simply look like that or look like that? But of course, if we're saying angles on a straight line add up to 180, well, surely, there's an angle on a straight line, there's an angle on a straight line, and there's an angle on a straight line. So, in fact, is the answer to that 180. So it's really nice that that happens, because you confront kids with that question, then you confront them with that question. How many of them actually change their answer? And that's a key misconception that needs addressing early on. So I flipping love that. And indeed, the way this rule is presented, the sum of angles at each point on a straight line equal 180 degrees. I need to build that into my repertoire at each point, underlined and in bold there, and for good reason. So I absolutely love that. But there's more to this lesson I like, because there's questions and then students get onto the worksheet. Now the worksheet's brilliant. It's a Word file that looks like this, and you get nice number-based examples just to get their fluency up there, find the missing angles. Then they get a bit more complex. But then as they build up, again, we're getting a bit more complex here, a bit more complex there. But then we start to bring algebra into play. And by the time you get to the end, kids are doing some pretty complex things. I mean, look at that one for question D. So for me, this, and whether you call it mastery or whatever, the essence or what I like about this lesson is how deep it's going. It's not just staying on the surface of two angles adding together to make 180 degrees. It's doing some pretty challenging things, bringing in algebra, bringing in triangles and so on. So I really, really, really like this. And then the final thing is, at the end of the lesson, there's a lovely exit ticket that focuses on basics, more tricky stuff, different shapes, and then a really complex one there. So I don't think this is a standalone lesson. I think this is almost a whole sequence of lessons. Potentially, if you're doing this with year 7, this could be a week's worth of material. With year 9s, maybe 3 lessons, 2 or 3 lessons worth, and so on. It's great. It's just tackling a topic in depth in a really structured, really nice way. I absolutely love it. So whether you call it a mastery lesson or not, Mr. McCourt, I hope you agree with me that this is a really, really impressive lesson. And like anything, a good lesson in the wrong hands can be a disaster. I've taken some good lessons and messed them up myself pretty bad in the past. So this needs adapting to suit the needs of your students. It needs looking at carefully. It doesn't just work off the shelf like any good resource, but this is a really, really, really nice lesson. I absolutely love it. So if you use it, hop back onto the resource page, leave a review, leave some thanks for the author, and I shall be back with a fresh resource of the week next week. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.